Hi, my name is EJ Massa. I was sent something very special by one of our podcast guests, Mark from Smash Brothers Gaming. He also has a website, geekguild.com, and he previously sent me the GDMU, which I made a video installing that. And now he sent me this Build Your Own Game Boy kit, which you can also find at geekguild.com for $99 as of this recording. He sent this to me with no expectation I'd create a video, and all opinions are of my own. I just thought it would be fun to put this together on camera, so let's take a look at the contents. In one little packet here, there's a transparent shell and some screws. Seems very well made and a dead ringer for the original Game Boy shell, except this one's transparent. Taking a look at the other packet, we have some buttons and rubber membranes, and these look exactly like the original colors and designs of the original Game Boy. Here are the rubber membranes, which look like, rubber membranes. Not much else to say on those. And here we have, wow, this is an actual authentic Game Boy board. For some reason, when he mentioned he sent a Build Your Own Game Boy kit, I figured it'd be some sort of Game Boy clone, hardware emulation, Game Boy on a chip or something. I don't know what they sell nowadays. But no, this is an original 1989 Game Boy motherboard. Very cool. Has all the original chips and ports and everything. This is new, however. You have the IPS screen, a new board with the inputs, and presumably circuits to help the IPS screen interface with the old Game Boy motherboard. The IPS screen comes equipped with a plastic frame that helps accurately install it. Sort of like how modern screen protector kits have guides to help install the screen protectors on, say, your brand new Switch 2. And of course, we have a recreation of the classic Game Boy lens, as seen in the border of Super Game Boy. The kit includes an adhesive for the screen and a ribbon cable to connect the Game Boy motherboard to the new IPS screen board. And last, but not least, a brand new mono speaker, to really tie the room together. Alright, let's get building, and I have to say, this is really fun. I'm having fun. There wasn't any instructions included, and there wasn't any immediately apparent on the website. I didn't look very hard, I'm lazy, so I thought it'd be fun to just see if I could build a Game Boy with this kit purely by intuition. Let's see how I do. I started with the front of the case first, and after playing with buttons and putting them into place with the membranes, I thought the better move was to install the IPS screen first. First, I peeled the back off the IPS screen adhesive, and as I was trying to line it up on the shell, the middle popped out, so I kind of just freestyled that frame on there without that part. You have the thick part, which corresponds to the thick part on the left, looking at it in this direction, of course, and a thin part on the right with a little indent on the bottom. And, that looks a little janky, but as they say, it's good enough for government work. I peeled off the plastic on the IPS screen, I took off the other side of the sticker on the adhesive, and then I carefully slid that screen with the guide frame onto the screw post surrounding the window where that screen will live. I pushed it down into the adhesive, and then I wiggled the plastic frame off the screen and off the screw posts. I also took off this red sticker because it looked ugly, and underneath it, it says void because we are all going to be consumed by the void at the end of time. And there we go, it looks pretty great. That guide frame really helps that screen get into place. Now it's time to add the buttons and the membrane. Obviously, the buttons fall right into place, and then you can tell the membranes are in the right place because there's little posts for the holes on the membrane that they go through the holes on the membrane. The speaker goes right into the speaker hole, and now that black board goes in next. It slides pretty easy into place with the input contacts facing toward the front. And then you connect the IPS screen ribbon cable into the top connector of that board. And once in place, you slide the locking mechanism down to hold the ribbon cable into place. Now, I didn't actually get this on film, but now would be a good time to go around the board and use the small included Phillips screws to lock the black board down into place. You can tell which holes to put the screws because the holes are smaller with the screw posts behind them. You can ignore the larger holes with clearly visible posts because those will be saved for the larger outer tri-wing screws, which hold the case together. Now here's the only place where you'll need to solder, and luckily the board already has a couple of blobs of solder on it, so we don't need to add more. Just use a hot soldering iron to solder on one speaker wire and then the other, and that's it. This is probably the biggest hurdle of the kit because I'm sure not everyone has a soldering iron, but I'm sure a cheap soldering iron will do. Finally, we need to add the real Game Boy brains. So we'll slide in the included ribbon cable into the Game Boy board. Make sure that the copper leads of the ribbon cable are facing toward the board, and push it in carefully so that it's snugly in the connector. Then the other side of the ribbon cable goes into the black board connector. Again, the ribbon cable leads should be facing the board. The Game Boy board goes into its place. You can tell where it should be because the game card port is in the back, and you should see openings for like the link cable port on the side, and they should line up. You can see the headphone jack board there, and that naturally goes on the bottom, and this other floating board naturally goes to the side here. So we put the back of the shell on, making sure to slide that floating board up into the back shell, and taking care to thread the wires around the screw post so that the screw that will fasten the shell together with doesn't hit that wire. And before we button it up, we should also make sure to add this plastic power switch on top. Now we grab our Nintendo Tri-Wing screwdriver and screw on the 4 Tri-Wing screws on top of the Game Boy, securing the shell tightly in place. And before I put any more screws in, I want to test out the system. So the closest game I found was Yoshi, a fairly delightful Tetris clone. I add some fresh batteries in and slide that beautiful game cart into the cartridge slot. Now for the moment of truth. Well, that distorted Nintendo logo is truly a familiar sight. Now I know I should clean the cart in a more legitimate way, but I can't help but use the troubleshooting of my childhood and blow into the cartridge. See, we wouldn't have done it all the time when we were kids if it didn't work. Sound works, screen works, buttons work. Looks and plays fantastic, like a real Game Boy. And that screen, oh, that's so good. Well, since it works, it's time to finish up. I used a blower bulb to make sure there's no dust on the screen. I peeled off the front plastic and the back, revealing the adhesive, and carefully placed that iconic Game Boy lens into place. Perfect. Finally, I added the 2 screws in the back where the batteries are, and I buttoned everything up. One cool feature of this build, if you push in the contrast wheel, you can toggle different color palettes. So if you want that classic DMG green pea color, you can revel in all the green penis.
I will eat your penis! Oh, no.
Personally, I prefer the gray color palette, which reminds me of the Game Boy Pocket. That's a palette I always was fond of. Man, that screen is really good. It makes the Game Boy way more playable in my opinion. So that's it. I really recommend a Game Boy kit like this. If you come across a few old Game Boy games and you like to play them, a little project like this could be a lot of fun. I'm really impressed with this specific kit, and I figured it out with no instructions. And if you're interested in this kit, please check out geekguild.com. And if you want to see more Game Boy content, check out my top 10 Game Boy and Game Boy Color games video. That's a gem. But that's all for now. Until next time, bye.